just like to welcome Jeff Bland up here. Jeff has been a entrepreneur in our portfolio for a long time and an innovator in the food as health space for an even longer time. So I will let you take it away.
Thanks, Dan. Well, thanks everybody. I've got a couple of show and tells that I want to pass around. You may wonder why these are show and tells. I'll send those this direction with these two. These are things I'd like you to smell. And then I'll send these around this other direction. And similarly, I'd like you to just take a whiff of each of these. This is part of what I want to kind of contextualize from a different perspective, this food as medicine conundrum that we find ourselves. I'm going to focus on food. What is food? Now, all of you probably think you know food because you've consumed it your whole life. But we are in a revolutionary reconstruction of what food is right now that's seismic in its change, that is changing all of healthcare. The next few years, we will say there was so much that we thought were facts that we'll find were only temporal facts to be replaced by new facts. And I'd like to share with you where this new business environment, I believe, is going to emerge that will take advantage of this. So what is the business opportunity for food and health? The next big thing isn't a drug, it's a dinner. I want to emphasize that. That is how I'm going to contextualize this discussion. So why do I think I can speak with any background? I've done this for 50 years. This is my 52nd year, actually. I've been founder and president of a number of companies, the largest physician nutritional company, Epigenetics, that we sold in 2010. And I'm also the founder of the Institute for Functional Medicine in 1990 that now has over 200,000 physicians who we put through our courses. So I'm the functional medicine guy. And I've written books and given lectures and traveled 6 million miles. So those are my kind of background information. This is a little bit about the Institute for Functional Medicine, which we're really excited is kind of getting traction. We have a textbook. We provide CME courses to physicians, and it's starting to be talked about. It's starting to get sticky. So why is this all kind of the food and health movement connector? Because there's this convergence of science and market demand. If we really look at what's happening right now, the definition of food and its understanding its relationship to health is being driven by a revolution in cell biology. I don't know if you've had an opportunity to read Dr. Mukherjee's new book, his most recent book on cellular biology. He was the Pulitzer Prize winner for his book, The Emperor of All Maladies, about cancer. But his most recent of his 3 books talks about the revolution that's occurring in cell biology, understanding actually at the cellular level how ultimately chronic disease develops in human beings. When I went to medical school in the 60s, we didn't know those answers. We did it experientially by observation. Everything was put together on community-based kind of observational levels. It's only recently now that we've had mechanistic understanding as to how genes and environment interact to give rise to the expression that becomes our health and disease patterns. And so if you ask, what is the largest nutritional research study that's ever been done that looks at health outcomes in a double-blind placebo-controlled type of fashion? It is the PREDIMED study. The PREDIMED study, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, is done in Spain. And it's a study that looked at over 14,000 individuals, 7,000 individuals under controlled dietary considerations, either a standard diet or a, quote, a Mediterranean diet with and without nuts or olive oil, virgin olive oil, and looked at health outcomes over a period of more than 7 years. The results was done very precisely. It was a very complicated study to do. It was done elegantly by a whole collection of investigators across the Mediterranean countries. And the outcome of this study was frame shifting. So this was published in 2014, so it's about 10 years old. And I'm just summarizing one of many things that were learned from this study, but the one that might be most interesting is that the outcome of the people that were on the Mediterranean diet with nuts and virgin olive oil had a 50% lower incidence of cardiovascular disease over a period of 5 years. There is no drug in the arsenal that doctors have today that can deliver that value in terms of patient outcome. So this was quite revolutionary. This is food as medicine at the real level with people in normal lives going about their daily work, not in metabolic ward situations in which their outcome was significantly improved as a consequence of intervention. It also showed that there were peripheral benefits in terms of lowered incidence of diabetes and lowered incidence of cognitive dysfunction related to memory loss with aging. So multiple systemic effects across multiple organ systems upon the same interventional therapy with food. It's a food-based intervention program. So if we look at how this works, it leads into a whole convergence of different disciplines within science. The nutritional epigenetics is kind of this revolutionary new field that's emerging that says what we eat actually marks our genes with messages that tell how our genes are going to be expressed. There are many U's in your genetic potential, as you probably know. You are not one U. You are multiple potential U's. You're pluripotential based upon how your genes are expressed. And the expression of those genes is regulated by the epigenetic regulation of the loci on the gene that control how it's going to perform. And that has now been found to be regulated in part, a major part, by what you eat. Our food is information that speaks to our genes. Let me say it again. Our food is not just calories. Our food is not just sustenance. It's not just satiety. It is information that speaks to our genes that regulates our function. And it doesn't occur like a drug just in one day. These are weak interactions with ligand and binding coefficients that relate to cellular regulatory processes that occur over months, years, and decades of living that give rise to shape how we look, act, and feel. Even in identical twins, as you probably know. Identical twins have different outcomes based upon how they actually are experiencing their life, what they eat, where they live, how they think, how they exercise. So even identical genes are expressed differently based upon experience. So if you look at what this really means in contemporary 2025 language, this was published just last week in the New England Journal of Medicine. You probably know this is considered one of the world's premier medical journals. This is work of two investigators at Harvard, one of who I happen to personally know. He's spoken at some of our meetings, Dr. Barabasi. This is entitled The Chemical Complexity of Food and Implications on Therapeutics. Now, I could spend way more time than you'd want to give me going over this article, but I'll just summarize very quickly. Summarize by saying there are more than 139,000 molecules that have identified in food, all of which have some biological impact, of which we're now just starting to learn. Let me say it again. 139,000 different molecules in foods. There are 30,000 foods that have been shown to be edible by humans, of which we consume 90% of our calories from only 10 foods. Therefore, the diversity of information we get from our diets today is very limited by the common compounds that we're producing in agriculture today off what I would call production-based agriculture. So if you look at what these really mean, these food molecules then modulate function in ways that you can only understand if you look at systemic effects. And we couldn't study this until recently because we're talking about terabytes of data. The only way you can analyze that is with machine learning. So now we fortunately have the convergence of informatics with machine learning that allows us to handle these big data sets from which we can start to actually interpolate how the complex nature of foods influences individual genotypes to create health outcomes of either health or disease. So if you look at what that means is the Barabasi and Locazo group called this NDMs. These are nutrition dark matter effects. Why are they dark matter effects? Just like we hear about the dark matter in the genome, because these nutrients that I'm talking about are not vitamins and minerals or proteins or carbohydrates or fatty acids. They're this complex array of chemicals that we eat naturally from what genes and plants produce that then are eaten by animals that get incorporated in animals, depending on how they're fed, that we eat in our foods. And those are biological modifiers of our function. And they cut across every organ system and every functional capability of the body. So we're getting reprogrammed by what we eat, and how we look and how we act and how we feel is a reflection of that. It's our legacy for how this information is translated. So, let me move ahead. Let me talk about one specific food that we have been spending quite a bit of time on. This is a 3,500-year-old food, one of the two oldest foods ever been husbanded by humans. It's called Himalayan Tartary buckwheat. It was grown originally on a wild plant on the slopes of the Himalayan mountains. And we've made this our cause because it turns out it's extraordinarily rich in its whole family of nutrients that are known to modulate immunological function. It's one of the blue zone foods. You probably know the blue zones are the areas of the world where people live long without common medicines. So this is a partial list of the 126 different phytochemicals that are found in Himalayan Tartary buckwheat that have been eaten for 3,500 years in people that didn't have access to modern medicine. That actually has a very powerful effect on immunological function. And that cuts around immune function in virtually every organ of the body. Now, why did I pass around the flint corn? I passed around the flint corn for you to look at to remind you that in each of the kernel of those corn ears that I sent around, they're a different color. And what are those colors coming from? Those colors are indicative of a specific phytochemical that's manufactured off the genes of that kernel of corn. It could be delphinium that produces purple, or it could be a carotenoid that produces orange-red. Each kernel has a different personality. But how is that? Because all the kernels have the exact same genes. This won the Nobel Prize in Medicine, by the way, for the discovery of what's called transposons. The genes don't stay stationary. They can jump around, and they can be expressed in different ways depending upon the environment in which that particular organism is exposed. And so this is an extreme example of what happens when you actually get the genes, which are all fixed in the same in every kernel of that corn, to experience a different environment, that its genes are expressed into different bioactive compounds. These are polyphenols, all of which have biological function. So one kernel of that corn has a different biology potentially than another kernel of that corn, even though they share the same identical genes. That is a metaphor to human living, by the way, as to how our genes are influenced in their expression by our environment. So what happens is you have these different compounds in foods that are produced as a consequence of different genes that are turned on as exposure to our different environments. And flint corn is just a kind of an extreme example of how this multicoloration depicts what's going on at the genetic level. And the phytochemicals that are produced as a consequence of it to give rise to the color. So I said around the two things I wanted you to sniff. I don't know how many of you did that, but you probably sniffed different fragrances. So one was, I think you could probably pick up the fragrance of dill, and the other was the fragrance of spearmint. Those are the extracts of those plants. Now, if you ask me what specifically gave rise to the flavor and the taste, or the flavor and odor of those two plants, I would tell you it's a chemical in the plant that the plant makes from its genes called carvone. That's the chemical structure that an organic chemist would say is carvone. Well, you say, well, hold on, but one smells like mint, the other smells like dill, and they taste different. How can that be the same chemical? Because actually the difference in the carvone between the two plants is only on the way they rotate plane polarized light. One is called D-carvone, the other is called L-carvone. The specificity of nature and your receptors to the molecules you get in food is so specific that it even can be affected by the rotational right or left-handedness of the molecule. Now, why am I using this as an example? Because I want you to think of the precision by which we eat and how it influences the signaling process in our body that gives rise to our function. These are not gross things. These are structure-function relationships of the bioactive principles in our food that regulate function in ways that we never until recently understood. This is a paradigm-shifting concept of food as medicine. So if you start looking at then what ethnobotanical medicine would say about dill and spearmint, they have two different pharmacologies. Ethnopharmacology for dill oil is different than spearmint oil because they have different effects on the human body, and they only differ in structure by the way they rotate plane polarized light, one being right-handed and the other being left-handed as the body perceives them. I want to emphasize the specificity of our diet and how it regulates our function. Okay, so what are the platforms that we're seeing that are enabling this movement? It's a convergence of platforms. Wearables, I don't know if you're a geek like I am, but I like knowing my biometrics. We're the first population in the history of the world where people have access to 24/7 information, not just about their fitness, their heart rate, their heart rhythm, their heart rate variability, their body temperature, their respiration rate, their sleep cycling. These are biometric information that are surrogate markers for how your immune system is communicating to your nervous system, which is communicating to your musculoskeletal system. It is a living record of your body's physiological function. And we're the first group of people ever to have access to that. And now you say, well, but that's overwhelming. It's so much information. But now we have a cloud where our information is transported seamlessly and quietly to the cloud that has information systems that sends back to us a simple distilled bit of information. So we don't have to be an expert. The algorithms of machine learning do it for us. That is an empowerment that is a one-way street to a new enlightened population. So when I talk about, will the government change our healthcare system? No. We, people, are going to change the healthcare system. It is a whole revolutionary change with power of information, power of access, power of need that is creating, with the technology we have, to develop a whole new marketplace for how health is going to be evolving, and companies are going to fill those spaces. So we now have genetic sequencing and epigenetic sequencing. For less than $100, you can have your full genome done now. Think of that. It was over $1 billion for the first genome. Now it's hundreds at the most, but you can actually get it down to $100. And now that information can go through algorithmic processing with machine learning. Now we have generative technologies that allow you to pump your information in there and ask questions, and it'll tell you about what your genes are all about. This is powerful, empowering new information that changes the whole relationship we have to our nutrition and its health outcomes. Well, now let me talk briefly about, if you haven't been persuaded yet that this is a revolution, let me give you another example. So I have a colleague, a good friend. His name is Dr. Mark Hyman. You might be familiar with him. He's quite popular. He's written, I think, 14 best-selling health books, New York Times bestsellers. And so Mark is a functional medicine devotee. And so he asked me many years ago, he said, Jeff, so what would most change the course of healthcare if we were to be able to introduce it? And I said, if everyone had information about their physiology at a level that they could understand, so they would empower them with information from which they could make intelligent decisions, that would really, I think, help move this movement ahead. So he, being a very innovative guy, got together with a group in Silicon Valley, and they founded a new company called Function Health. It's only 2 years old. Function Health, for what I consider a fairly reasonable fee, $500, allows you to have 125 different analytes measured in your blood twice, so a pre and then post. So you get, for $500, you get 2 shots at the goal, and it does an interpretation of your data based upon machine learning of what those analytes tell you, and comes back giving you some thoughts about what you might want to concentrate on based upon your algorithms. Now, when I first heard about this, which was 3 years ago, I said, Mark, it's a theoretically great idea, but I'm not sure American public is ready to do fully analyzed blood analysis. I mean, that sounds maybe a little bit too ambitious. Well, you know what's happened, right? That company today, Function Health, its enterprise value is $2.5 billion. It's the fastest growing healthcare company from scratch ever. I mean, let that set in. This is a unicorn. So it says something about our public. 174,000 customers, no marketing, and now they have a waiting list of over 70,000 people because they can't keep up. And it's the biggest use of blood drawing facilities in the United States right now. So the things that you might think are crazy and outside the scope of real are becoming real because of the nature of the rate of change of how these things are influencing what ultimately is this food is medicine revolution. So we're rapidly progressing, I think, in trying to develop the science that underpins this. So we, our small little company, Big Bull Health, decided we would do a clinical trial, pilot study with humans to evaluate what impact Himalayan tartary buckwheat had on their immune system using a gene chip that we had built at Illumina to measure 750,000 CpG sites to see if we could actually influence their immune system at the genetic level after the course of 90 days of taking the product. And lo and behold, we found out after 90 days that the consumption of that particular ancient food led to a 47% reduction in the rate of immune cell aging in humans. Now that has led us into saying, well, hold it, if that's true, that's pretty big frame shifting implication. And so we then put ourselves in the portfolio of these food as medicine companies that are developing science-based support. And you've got a couple of them in the S2G portfolio of companies that are actively pursuing this kind of approach. The implication of this is that we want to tie together a complete systems approach. We want to go to agriculture. So yes, we're now growing Himalayan tartary buckwheat in upstate New York. We have our own farms. First group to ever do this in the United States. Now they're organic and now regeneratively agriculture approved. We are working very hard to close the loop between farmers and ultimately the consumers and then ultimately the physicians that we train as to how to use these concepts in food as medicine therapeutics. And so it leads to an altered new business landscape with clinically proven foods built on authentic research. We are now engaged in what I think is the largest clinical trial on a single food and its immune effects in human ever done. 850 participants in a double-blind placebo protocol that we've just got approval with IND. And so we'll be moving ahead by the end of this year to finish that trial. And I believe the results of this are going to be quite interesting because we had a new gene chip built for this with 1.3 million sites that we can analyze changes in genetic performance over the course of the 90 days of consumption. And we're tying that together with health outcome questionnaires so we can actually look at the felt states of individuals who have been on the program. This will be when AI machine learning analyzed give us, I think, an understanding of how food that has a specific nutrient density can influence immunity in such a way as to improve patient outcome, sleep, energy, cognition, mood, those kinds of things. So to me, we're looking at the future of health right now. It's being driven from the bottom up, not from the top down. The government will follow. It will follow what consumers want because we're in a new age of advocacy. Science plus tech plus consumer behavior becomes a shift in the whole marketplace. If Function Health can go from nothing to $2.5 billion of valuation in less than 2 years based upon this innovative concept that people have ownership of their own body physiology, that's a pretty powerful concept that I think might align with business opportunities going forward. So with that, I'll just say that this is our Big Bull Health kind of landscape analysis as to how we see things happening. We see that the historic model, that's on the top, the historic model is that food, agriculture, marine products, and healthcare all work together to improve yield, to improve production, to produce quantity-focused distribution, but it leads to instability of the system. Instability of the system at the land, at the sea, and at the human level. That's why we have a soil scientist working for us that does analysis of the microbiome of our soil and our plants, because we know we can maximize the production of these immune active nutrients by a healthy soil that produces a healthy plant, that produces a healthy human. There's a through line of immunity because plants have their own immune system that we use when we eat them. And that then leads this top line to a systemic imbalance, medical diagnosis, medical treatment, sick care, and ultimately unhealthy people, planets, and plants. Our model, the emerging model, is a systems approach, food, agriculture, marine, and healthcare, looking at sustainability, regenerative diversity, natural balance, and stability based upon good science in a wellness-focused approach, not just disease-focused approach, in a wellness-focused approach by harnessing all this new technology we have available. Systems biology, genomics, informatics, wearables, biometrics, interactive change agents that we can put into behavior change, ultimately produce a different collection of products and services that are focused on not just the absence of disease, but the presence of wellness. That is a new economy that I think will be powering many companies. Thanks for listening.